Good evening, everyone. It's Scott Brown here with day 39 of Darren LaCroix's 90-Day Facebook Live Challenge. And this evening, Kelly and I were talking a little bit about succession planning and what it means and how it works and why we do the things that we do and what happens when we don't do the things that we do. And it brought me back to my life as a corporate manager. It brought me back to the years that I spent managing and leading in the corporate retail world. And it made me think of a couple of examples and a couple of stories that I think are very pertinent for these times. Shortly after we moved from Pittsburgh to Orlando, back in the late 90s, I ended up working for a lady who very openly and publicly made sure that we all knew that she did not want anyone of Hispanic descent, especially those people who are of Puerto Rican descent, representing the organization in any customer service form. The most discriminatory thing I had ever heard up to that time. And I stood up to her and I said, no, that's absolutely not right. We don't do that. That's not the way to run a business. That's not what we're going to be about. We're not going to do that. And it certainly didn't end exceptionally well for me, and it didn't end well for her either. But she had put herself into a position where she decided that she knew all that she needed to know, and her personal bias was going to be the way that we were going to run the store. And it's not right. And it wasn't right then, and it's not right today. But it also wasn't the only time that sort of thing has happened. I have worked for people over the past 20 years that have openly mocked people who had plastic surgery to help alleviate birth defects. I have worked for people who have wanted to fire individuals because English was their second language, and how dare them speak with an accent when they were born and raised in a different country. I have worked for people who didn't want anyone overweight to represent the brand. I worked for a guy who actually hit me in the back of the head with a pricing gun machine at one point, and I had to get some stitches for it. There's a lot of bad behaviors out there, and a lot of bad behaviors out there that were tolerated for a long, long time in the retail world. And I know it wasn't just retail, because I've read the articles, I've heard the stories of every industry out there having their own pariahs who did things that were just completely contradictory to the way you're supposed to treat people and the way you should run a business. It was the way things worked, unfortunately, and it was wrong. When the problem came in, one of the big problems that comes in is that as society changes and demands different behaviors, do you have a plan for what to do with those individuals that don't exhibit the behaviors that you want to exhibit? Do you have a way to help support them, to help them manage around and eliminate their bias and what they think are proper behaviors that are not proper behaviors? Because the higher up somebody goes up the corporate ladder, the lonelier it gets. They don't have peers. They don't have people who are on their same level to work with, to talk with, to partner with, to bounce ideas off of on a regular basis. Once you get to a certain level, there's you, and then there's everybody underneath you. And sometimes you only get the information that people underneath you want you to hear, so they look good, and because they're afraid to give you bad news. But that means that you don't necessarily evolve anymore, and sometimes you devolve, because like they say, absolute power corrupts absolutely. So how do you give those people at the top of organizations, whether it's in stores or whether it's in a division or even whether it's in a company, how do you get them the support that they need so that they can do the right things, not just the things that are most comfortable for them or the things that reinforce their own personal biases, but rather do the things that are the right things to do for society, for people, and for the company? How do you get them their support? And then what happens if they never end up evolving? What happens if they never end up changing their behaviors and you have to find somebody to replace them? What's your succession plan? Over the years, I've been really surprised, and it has happened just about every place I've worked, that when we would do succession planning, the one group of people that we would never include in the feedback of the succession plan were the people whom we had just put on succession plans. The people that we had just identified as being our top talent, we never told them that you're our top talent and we want to help groom you for this next position. It was something that aren't a lot of places that it was actually forbidden to ever tell those people, we really think that highly of you and we want to develop you to do something better. Not shockingly, a lot of those people, because they have choices, because they were great performers, would leave. It's one of those dirty secrets of the retail and service industries that people leave because a lot of times they don't know that they're being groomed to do something bigger and better. And unfortunately, the people who are forcing that sort of conversation upon them are the same folks who would have to leave for those people to get promoted. So they think they're doing in some sort of a self-preservation means, but all they're doing is hurting the organization long-term and hurting themselves because now they're surrounded more by people that only say yes and not people that push them to make a difference and push them to do the right things. So what are your succession plans? What are the plans that you have in your organization to give those people at the top of an organizational chart the ability to develop? And what are your plans to be able to help those folks that would be the next in line to move into a position, the skills they need to be able to succeed at a new position? Because the thing is, sometimes just because someone succeeds at this job doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to have the skill set to succeed at this other job. Leading somebody and managing at one level is not necessarily the same thing as what it is to lead or manage at a different level. There's different politics involved, there's different scopes involved, there's completely different skill sets involved, especially if you're taking somebody out of a technical role and trying to place them into a managerial role. Two completely different skill sets that don't necessarily tie into each other. So what's your plan to get somebody prepared to take on the next step somewhere? One of the great things I've seen companies like IKEA do is they build succession plans and then put people into positions to help them develop. And I remember years ago talking when I was at Bloomingdale's about the concept of a career lattice instead of a career ladder, where you can move laterally and maybe even take a step down at times in your career to get the experience you need to get to where you want to go eventually, so that you have the ability to drive your own career and get to where you're trying to go. And it wasn't always met with open arms. It was something different, but it's something that's becoming a lot more commonplace these days. What worked yesterday is not guaranteed to work tomorrow. The cultures that my generation grew up in, the ones that we inherited from our parents back in the 80s and 90s, when Generation Xers were first moving into managerial and leadership roles, is not the same culture that we're trying to pass on to the next generation. We've tried to evolve, but some of those practices have stayed embedded in organizations so firmly that they haven't necessarily allowed people to get to where they want to go. So my question for you is simple. What can you do tomorrow? What can you do tomorrow to help somebody who you've identified as someone that can take another step? What can you do to help them get ready for that other step? And I think the very first thing to do is to have a conversation with them. To say, hey, we think the world of you. We want to help you grow. Here's what we want you to do. What do you think? Sometimes those people are going to say, you know, I appreciate it, but that's not the job. That's not what I want to do. Sometimes they're going to say, I'm all in. Let's figure this out and let's go forward. And doing so in a way that doesn't threaten the people above them, I think that's incredibly important. Because just because you're developing someone to take on more responsibility doesn't mean you're pushing somebody else out. But it does mean maybe that you're giving those people at the higher levels of an organization an opportunity to be surrounded by people who are more capable, who can give them better feedback, and are just more talented to help them make better decisions. So succession planning isn't always about getting rid of somebody or replacing somebody. Sometimes it's about just grooming the next people, because at some point, everyone is going to leave their jobs. No one's going to be there forever. So how do you get ready for it tomorrow? If you find yourself in situations where you have people that are behaving in ways that aren't the way that you expect them to behave, that may have been appropriate in 1960 or 1950 or even 1930, but are definitely not appropriate today, then it's up to you to help develop them and hold them accountable so that they don't do the things tomorrow that they did yesterday to negatively impact your organization, the people they work with, the people that work for them, and most importantly, your customer base. Make sure that you're focusing on what you can do tomorrow to help get them better. So succession plans aren't just a piece of paper, but they should actually be a relationship-driven opportunity to help somebody become the next leaders in your organization. So having said that, I think I have to go shovel some snow. And part of my succession plan is to get a better shovel. So I hope all of you have a really good night tonight, and I will talk to you all on Sunday. Take care, everyone.